Okay, so you want to be like Elon? Build rockets that land themselves? Build cars that drive themselves? Become the richest man alive? Run 5 companies at once? Change the future of an entire species? That's the version the world sells you. Here's what it doesn't show you. A man borrowing rent money from friends. A marriage ending on the same week his companies almost died. 3 rockets exploding, one after another, while his bank account emptied out. A Christmas Eve phone call that decided whether thousands of employees would have jobs in January. This isn't the story of what Elon Musk built. It's the story of how his mind worked while he was building it. By the end of this video, you'll understand the thinking patterns behind almost every decision he's ever made. The ones that made him a genius, and the ones that nearly destroyed him. Let's go back to December 2008. Tesla has $9 million left in the bank. SpaceX has less than $200,000. Musk has already put over $100 million of his own PayPal fortune into these 2 companies. He doesn't own a house. He's borrowing money from friends to cover his own bills. 3 rocket launches have failed in a row. Any rational investor would have walked away after the first one. Musk didn't. But here's what almost nobody notices about this moment. It wasn't courage that kept him going. It was a belief system he'd built years earlier, a way of reasoning that let him see the situation completely differently than everyone around him. That belief system is called first principles thinking. Most people reason by analogy. They look at what's been done before and adjust it slightly. Rockets are expensive because rockets have always been expensive. That's the assumption almost every aerospace executive on Earth was operating under. Musk refused to accept it. Instead, he broke the rocket down to its raw materials, aluminum, titanium, copper, carbon fiber, and asked a simple question. What does the raw material actually cost on the commodity market? The answer was around 2% of what a finished rocket sold for. That gap wasn't gravity. It wasn't physics. It was the way the industry had always done things. And once Musk saw that the gap was artificial, he stopped treating it as fixed. That's the first pattern underneath everything he does. He doesn't ask, how has this been done? He asks, what are the actual laws of physics here? And what's just tradition wearing the disguise of law? It's why he builds reusable rockets when everyone said it was impossible. It's why he questioned whether cars needed dealerships, whether tunnels needed to be as expensive as cities assumed, whether batteries needed to cost what they'd always cost. But first principles thinking alone doesn't explain the next 12 years of his life. Because reasoning your way to a good idea is one thing. Staying in the fight when the idea is failing in public, expensively, again and again, that requires something else entirely. That brings us to the second pattern, an almost frightening tolerance for risk that other founders don't have. By 2008, Musk hadn't diversified his fortune. He'd bet essentially everything he owned on 2 industries, automotive and aerospace, that professional investors considered close to uninvestable. When Tesla's financing round nearly collapsed that December, he put in what was left of his own money, personally, hours before payroll would have bounced. He later described it as the lowest point of his life. His marriage was ending the same year. He said the pain was excruciating enough that he thought, for the first time, he might actually cry. Most people, faced with that kind of exposure, look for an exit. Musk did the opposite. He leaned further in. Why? Because Musk doesn't measure risk the way most people do. Most people ask, what's the chance this fails? Musk asks a different question. If this matters enough, does the probability of failure even change what I should do? He said, in his own words, that if something is important enough, you do it even when the odds are against you. That's not recklessness. It's a specific kind of asymmetric logic. If the mission, getting humanity to Mars, ending fossil fuel dependence, is existential enough, then a 90% chance of failure doesn't matter as much as the 10% chance of a civilization-altering success. That single mental shortcut is why he kept funding SpaceX after 3 explosions. It's the 4th launch, in September 2008, that finally reached orbit, days before the money would have run out completely. It's also why, days later, a Christmas Eve funding round saved Tesla with hours to spare. But none of this would have worked without another habit, one that people who work closely with him noticed again and again, an obsessive, almost inhuman relationship with work itself. Engineers who worked alongside him during those years described someone who didn't just manage the crisis from an office. He slept on factory floors. He rewrote production schedules at 2 in the morning. He treated exhaustion as a rounding error, not a signal to stop. This is where his thinking becomes genuinely different from most high achievers. For Musk, work isn't something that competes with identity. It is identity. The mission and the man are the same object. That fusion is what let him operate at a pace that looked to outsiders unsustainable, because for him, stepping back wasn't rest. It felt like abandonment. That's a dangerous thing to build a life around. But it's also precisely what let two companies survive a year that killed almost every other startup around them. Underneath that obsession was something more specific than just hard work, though. A method. Something Musk later described almost like an algorithm. Question every requirement. If an engineer told him a part needed to meet a certain specification, his first move wasn't to accept it, it was to ask who required it and why. Delete anything that isn't essential, even if that means deleting whole parts of the process. Only after deleting, simplify what's left. Only after simplifying, speed it up. Automation comes last, not first. Because automating a process that shouldn't exist just makes the mistake happen faster. That ordering matters more than it sounds. Most organizations optimize the process they already have. Musk's instinct is to interrogate whether the process should exist at all before touching a single dial to improve it. It's a small idea, but applied over a decade, across rockets, batteries, and factories, it compounds into a completely different cost structure than anyone else in those industries was working with. Here's what almost nobody notices, though. The same qualities that built all of this also created his biggest blind spots. The same intensity that pushed engineers to solve impossible problems also produced brutal public clashes with employees, partners, and regulators. The same first principles confidence that let him ignore expert consensus on rockets also led him to overpromise, repeatedly, on timelines. Self-driving cars next year, for years in a row, that never quite arrived on schedule. The same fusion of identity and mission that let him survive 2008 also meant he had almost no mechanism for separating the company's crisis from his own psychological state. When Tesla struggled again in 2018, during the Model 3 production ramp, he described sleeping on the factory floor, working past exhaustion, in almost identical terms to a decade earlier, as if the operating system hadn't updated, even after everything he'd learned. That's the paradox at the center of this mind. The traits that built the empire are the same traits that make it fragile. So how does it all connect? His willingness to question first principles gave him ideas nobody else was pursuing. His tolerance for asymmetric risk let him actually act on those ideas when the odds looked insane. His obsessive fusion with the mission gave him the endurance to survive the years where the ideas were failing publicly. And his ruthless 5-step method for simplifying processes turned survival into an actual, repeatable cost advantage over everyone else in the industry. Each pattern fed the next. Remove any single one, and the chain probably breaks. Take away the risk tolerance, and the first principles ideas stay theoretical. Take away the obsession, and the risk tolerance runs out of endurance before the odds turn. Take away the method, and even the survivors never become efficient enough to dominate a market. But the same chain that builds a rocket company can also burn out a marriage, alienate a workforce, and blur the line between conviction and denial. You don't need to build rockets or bet your entire fortune twice on companies most experts consider doomed. But the next time you're facing a decision that feels impossible, a project everyone says can't be done cheaper, faster, or differently than it's always been done, it might be worth asking the question that got Musk through 2008, not how has this always been done, but what's actually true here, and what have I just been told is true. Because sometimes the difference between those two questions is the difference between giving up and finding the 4% that was there all along.